keep an eye on the chat. So I think that's it. Oh, and then CEUs will come via email tomorrow, and as well as the link to the replay on YouTube. So, oh, and I'm Valerie. I'm co-chair of the Social Justice Committee, and we're so grateful to have Dr. Laura Anderson here to speak with us this evening. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, and then I will pass it over. Dr. Laura Anderson is a therapist, trauma resolution and recovery coach, writer, educator, and creator who specializes in complex trauma with a focus on domestic violence, sexualized violence, and religious trauma. Laura has a private practice in Nashville and is the founder and director of the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, an online coaching company where she and other practitioners work with clients who've experienced high demand, high control religions, adverse religious experiences, cults, and religious trauma. In 2019, Laura co founded the Religious Trauma Institute with the goal of providing trauma informed resources, consultation, and training to clinicians and other helping professionals who work with religious trauma survivors. Laura's first book, When Religion Hurts You, Healing from Religious Trauma and the Impact of High Control Religion, was released by Brazos Press in October 2023. She lives with her dog, Phoebe, in Nashville. So, what a treasure to have in our own city. And Laura, we are so excited for you to share with us on this very important, timely topic.
Yes. Hello, everybody. It's so great to see many familiar faces. Thank you for welcoming me here tonight. So we'll jump right in. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here talking about religious trauma in the election cycle. This is kind of based off of a course that I'll tell you a little bit more about at the end, but we're going to kind of work through the bones of that. Because obviously we're in an election cycle, which is oh so fun. And they are very triggering for a myriad of reasons, but especially if we are talking about religious trauma. For those of you who don't know, there's a deep marriage between the two. And I want to just clarify before we get too far into this, I'm not about bashing religion. I'm not anti-religion. I am very much anti-harm, anti-power and control, anti-abuse, anti-oppression, all of those fun things. But we're not going to be anti-religion. You're going to hear me use the terms high control religion, things like that. I'm not trying to call out any specific religion. But it's also worth noting that in this country, Christianity, American Christianity or evangelicalism is kind of the most popular religion. And that's also going to include things like the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, the Jehovah's Witness organization, things like that. So I'm kind of going to use the blanket term either of high control religion, Christianity. That's what we're talking about. So if we really want to talk about religious trauma in the election cycle, we kind of need a teeny tiny bit of a history. I'm not going to give you a huge history. I'll mention a resource in just a second. If you want the whole history, you could probably go back starting in about 1964 all the way to like when Barry Goldwater and Lyndon B. Johnson were running for the presidential election. But that's not really that exciting. Lyndon B. Johnson beat Barry Goldwater by a landslide. You might think, okay, what about like Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter? That's also very pivotal in this marriage of religion and politics. We don't need to go back there. There's a whole bunch you could learn. And how did we get to where we're at right now? If you want to learn more about that, I would highly recommend Bradley Onishi's book, Preparing for War. That is on the resource sheet that I think is going to be sent out to people. And so that'll be linked. For the purposes of our talk tonight, we're actually going to just go back to 2016, because as a clinician, that's when I started to see what we'll talk about, religious trauma and politics really converging in a clinical sense in my office, and perhaps in your office too, or in social media spaces, or in public discourse and things like that. And really, I saw it as like a mass exodus of people that were coming out of what we call high control religions, being very disillusioned as to what is happening. They were kind of confused, going, hey, I was taught about this God figure, this Jesus figure that was very specific, with very specific teachings and very specific rules and doctrines. And now my spiritual authorities or these religious figures are promoting specific candidates that seem to have very opposite characters. And they were very disillusioned, very confused, not sure what to do, and seeking guidance for that. On top of that, as they were coming out, they were asking questions of maybe, what do I believe? And experiencing symptoms that, for myself and the colleagues that I work with, were very close to symptoms that we notice in people with PTSD, CPTSD, trauma, other mental health disorders. And they were noticing that they were surrounding various religious practices, beliefs, doctrines, and things like that. Prior to this point, it's not that religious trauma didn't exist. It's that, kind of culturally or colloquially speaking, many of you know, religion has been kind of viewed as a pro-social or supportive factor. That's how many of us were taught about it in school. And so we hear about, clergy sexual abuse, and we've been told it's a Catholic problem or a one bad apple problem where, it happens, but, it not that often, right? And so we aren't really trained to deal with it. But we started seeing people coming out of what might be called high control religions or fundamentalist groups or cults or systems like that. And their symptomology was that of trauma. And so one of the things that I started to recognize, and I started to work with colleagues, was that I didn't like where all the research and was leading up until that point, where we were either vilifying religion and just saying, all religion is bad and must be pathologized, or you just become an atheist and that cures your religious trauma. I felt like that was reductionistic. I felt like it didn't really treat trauma as a physiological process. And so I started to look at religious trauma as trauma and treat it that way as well. And so that means that religious trauma is trauma, just like trauma from war, just like developmental trauma or sexualized trauma. It lives in our bodies and we resolve it in our bodies. And that means that the word religious just helps us better understand the context where the trauma originated from. And in that way, it takes away any need to convert or deconvert our clients into or out of, their original religion into another religion, or to make them an atheist or an agnostic or onto a different spiritual path. It actually has nothing to do with that. It is simply about helping them resolve the trauma in their body and recover from that. And perhaps that means that they end up on a different spiritual path. Maybe for some of them, it is out of their faith entirely. But that is for them to determine, not for us as therapists to determine. So that kind of brings us back to the election cycle and ultimately the 2024 election cycle, which for many people feel is, pretty much similar to the 2020 election cycle. And in some ways, maybe even a little bit worse, because we've kind of been here, done that. And so I wanted to start with the question of, why are election cycles triggering religious trauma in the first place? So I listed out a couple reasons. I'm going to go through these fast because I've got a lot of information to give to y'all. But I really think that one of the main reasons that election cycles can trigger religious trauma is that in this country, there is a large overcoupling of politics and religion. So they're kind of like this. I think you guys can probably see that. We often hear, in order to be a true believer, you have to believe, or you have to follow this person. You must vote this way. You must endorse this political candidate. You have to vote for a certain policy or in this party. They are coupling your belief in a higher power with a specific political party. And in that, people are starting to see family members, friends, and communities take on kind of new identities that are political, but calling them religious. They're marrying the two together. And then within that, many religious groups, not all religious groups, I want to be very clear, this is not everybody, but there's many religious groups that are starting to promote political messages as a part of their religious services, their religious doctrines, their religious beliefs, their religious activities, and really kind of weaving them in as a part of their system and who they are. And so we have then this overcoupling of these two things together. So that's part of why religious trauma can be triggered from election cycles. Also, it can be triggered because many people who left religion feel like they simply cannot get away from it because it's so prevalent in the culture at large. And so they don't feel safe, even if they've left, even if they no longer go to church or they've deconverted or deconstructed. And within that, there's a concept that I call embodied fundamentalism. I'll tell you about it in a second here. But there's many facets of culture that feel just as fundamentalist as the churches that they may have left. So embodied fundamentalism is this idea that we literally embody fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is a thinking and is a pattern of thinking and relating, right and wrong, good or bad. It's very binary. Here is what is in, here is what is out, and it lives inside of us. But religion absolutely does not have the corner market on that. We see this in all sorts of systems and groups and advocacy, advocacy groups, politics, where we go, this is the right way to do or to live or to be. And you must subscribe to this or you're not a part of it or part of us, right? And so we see the flavors of that in other areas of culture. And so an election cycle absolutely highlights that. And so during that, it can feel very familiar. During an election cycle, it feels very familiar. Like, oh my goodness, I've left this high control religion that I'm a part of. And now I'm seeing this happen during an election cycle. I feel very triggered because this feels very familiar all the time. I think election cycles are also very triggering for religious trauma because they deeply impact relationships. Research started coming out in 2017 that talked about how the election cycle that had just happened was starting to cause a lot of divisiveness in familial relationships in particular, where families were no longer able to sit around a table and share a meal because their conversations were so politically charged that it would just cause so much disruption. And people were kind of siding off and we couldn't even get through dinner, right? And so it caused just an enormous amount of disconnect within families, within friendships, within groups that had previously been able to find common ground, but were no longer able to, because the beliefs that were previously, we were able to find this common ground, were now becoming so central to their identity that it was very difficult to be in relationship because people then started to feel deeply unsafe with other people or groups of people. And so disconnect in relationships. And then with that, there's significant feelings of grief, there's renegotiation of relationships, and even complete dissolution of relationships, which is obviously triggered during an election cycle when all of a sudden this is coming back up and it can put added strain onto relationships. And then the final reason I think that election cycles can really trigger religious trauma is that it often feels like people's bodies, identity, rights, and relationships are on the line to this point above, especially for folks that are in marginalized bodies, groups, and communities, because they often rightfully feel this because their very existence is sometimes up for vote with each election cycle, which is very important to recognize. And conversely, when different religious groups have beliefs tied to various political stances, there can be this sense of fervent belief that a higher authority kind of approves of a certain political candidate or policy or law. And that means that, if that side doesn't win, then their religious side is also at a loss. And so they have this belief that they're fighting this spiritual battle, which can feel like a deep sense of persecution. And so they feel like their rights, their identity is also on the line. And so we see kind of this triggering thing that can happen as well. So I'm just using that to lay the groundwork. There are, of course, many other reasons that people can be triggered, that religious trauma can be triggered because of an election cycle. But as I look at the people that are coming into my office, as I talk to people in social media spaces, these are kind of some of the four main ones that seem to be coming up over and over as to why do I feel so triggered during this election cycle in specific. So I want to move into what are some of the things that we can be helping our clients, other people that are in our world as we're navigating this time of year, the most wonderful time of the year. Just kidding. And I want to just kind of preface this by saying these things that I've come up with are based off of the clients that I work with, which are almost exclusively skills that were not taught in high control religions. So you might be saying oh, I already do this with clients, or my clients know these things. It's entirely possible that they do. But most of the clients that are coming out of high control religions, cults, fundamentalism, these just were not things that we were ever taught. I say we because I grew up in it too. So I got to learn them as well. But these are things that I think most of our clients would do well to be learning, and probably are learning as well. But when we talk about how do we help people navigate through this election cycle, I think these skills can apply to everybody. So the first one we can help our clients with is learning self-trust. So how do I trust myself instead of only trusting the group? Right? This is a huge thing in high control groups, is that we have to trust the group, not trust myself. So that can start with developing an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control. In high control groups, the focus is almost exclusively external. We divorce ourselves from ourself, because the self is often categorized as bad or evil, sinful, or unworthy, cannot be trusted. And I must look outside of myself to determine if I'm good or valuable or worthy. Only those outside of me can determine what is good or okay for me. And they can tell me what is trustworthy. And so developing a sense of self-trust is very important. Learning, how do I trust myself? One of the tools that I like to use for that is Brene Brown's Anatomy of Trust. And I really like her book, or sorry, her short video on, I think I first heard it on the Oprah Network, but it's the Anatomy of Trust video. And she goes through the component parts of what she calls the anatomy of trust. And I usually assign it to my clients as homework. It's a 20-minute video. And I'll have them identify one or two component parts of trust. And I'll say, okay, what are the couple parts that you want to be working on? And we start from there. So she has a whole acronym, BRAVING. So it's boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgmentalism, and giving the most generous assumption. Yeah. I use this video a lot. That's why I know these. I don't have a great memory. That part is memorized. And so we just go through that. We start to develop trust within themselves, and that can be really helpful. One note on that is I like to work with clients to understand the cost of trusting yourself instead of just trusting the group. Because in high control religions, the cost was very high. It often meant that if I was going to trust myself over trusting the group or over trusting somebody else, it meant that you could be excommunicated or disfellowshipped, or you might even go to hell. right? There was a high price tag for trusting yourself, for looking inwards for wisdom. And you were often labeled a very dangerous person if you trusted yourself. But the thing is, this still happens outside of high control religions as well. Most of you have probably heard of the concept of cancellation, and it happens quick outside, right? If you don't jump on a bandwagon, if you don't speak up, if you don't say the right thing, if you don't, put a post up that says, this or that, or whatever it is, you can get canceled very quickly. Or if you just have a different opinion, or maybe you want to take time and gather facts, or whatever it might be. If you don't go with the group and instead decide to trust yourself or whatever, for whatever reason, you can oftentimes be canceled or left out or be labeled a dangerous person or whatever that might be. And there's a cost to that. And I think it's worth talking about that with people, because that is not a particularly fun thing. And that can be very triggering unto itself. And that's not necessarily a reason to not trust yourself, but it is worth noting that there can sometimes be that cost. The final piece of self-trust that I work on with clients is developing a sense of curiosity, which I really believe can be the foundation of self-trust, and I think is the opposite of fundamentalism. Because in fundamentalism, it is all about certainty. You have to be certain. That is what fundamentalism thrives on, at least the illusion of certainty, right? And within that, there is no curiosity. And curiosity is all about like developing that sense of self-trust. It's going, what is this all about? Asking questions, learning more. And so when we can allow ourselves to be curious about things, it allows us to grow and change. And that further helps us to learn how to trust ourselves. We're tapping into, what does that mean to me? What does that feel like? How does that land on me? It gives us information about ourselves, and then we can ask more. We can be curious about more. And so I love that piece of self-trust. I know Brene Brown doesn't talk about it in her, anatomy of trust, but I'll just add that piece in there. Adding that into the anatomy of trust is that foundation of curiosity. Developing that with our client as a part of self-trust can be incredibly valuable. The next thing I work on with clients is developing embodied boundaries, not just boundaries, embodied boundaries, right? I say that because in high control religion, boundaries, that's just a buzzword. They're actually just rules, right? They are rules that are prescribed by an external authority for you. And so I really love the idea of using your body as a sense of information and wisdom and goodness. So when we're developing embodied boundaries, we are helping our clients determine what is safe for them in an embodied way, rather than just creating another list of rules of what is right and wrong. Anytime when I'm working with clients in like boundaries or anything with high control religion, I always try to find a way to do like the opposite of what is done in high control religion, because they do such a good job of taking the fun out of everything and doing it like the wrong way, right? And so like if they're just about creating rules that is right and wrong, like what is a more flexible way to do it, and what is a way that we can involve the body, the self, that can change and evolve over time, and embodied boundaries offers that. And so what I love doing with clients is introducing them to this concept that boundaries are flexible over time. They can change and evolve over time depending on who you are as a person, on your values, what's going on in your life, who you're with, the situation, versus these rigid, unwavering rules that must be true till the end of time. As you grow and change as a person, your boundaries can also do that. I mean, they could change from day to day if you need them to, if we're being honest. But that feels very different than what high control religion kind of offers as these rules or prescriptions for living. So embodied boundaries are very helpful. And we're going to build on that concept of embodied boundaries, but that is something that can be very helpful when we're working through kind of skills to help navigate through an election cycle. And why are they helpful? Because we are often dealing with family members and friends who vote and or believe differently. So this is where we're going to start implementing some of the embodied boundaries. They don't usually say this, at least not super loudly, but in fundamentalism, difference equals danger. That could be a difference of beliefs. It could be a difference of lifestyles, preference, practice, anything. Difference equals danger. And the ways that our bodies are created, physiologically speaking, if we believe that difference equals danger, how that lives in us means that we are then, when difference enters the room, we are then on guard in a defensive posture, ready to go, whatever that might mean. That could be a fight posture. It could be a flight posture. There's a variety of things. That's getting into a lot of nervous system stuff, which we'll kind of touch on in a little bit. But if I believe that you being different means that you are dangerous, maybe it's because you have a different belief than I do, you vote different than I do, whatever that might be, then you simply being in my presence puts me in a defensive posture, which means navigating a relationship, even with neutrality, is going to be very, very difficult. So that's important to note, because when we're trying to navigate this election cycle, we're going to have to be dealing with people who believe differently and vote differently than we do. And alternately, our nervous systems are attuned to the same thing. Difference equals danger, right? And so that can be very difficult then to be in these spaces where both of us are feeling very on guard with each other. So how do we deal with that then? How do we help our clients navigate through that? Couple things that I like to work with my clients on. What are the areas of the relationship that we could kind of tend to that are independent of religious and or political beliefs? Like, are there other areas of commonality that we could really be focusing on that we could kind of build the relationship around? I am going to just turn up my lights a little bit because I feel like I'm getting a little dark here. Maybe not. We'll see. I look a little washed out. Sorry about that. So in some cases, there just aren't. There's some people where their religious and political beliefs are their entire identity, and they just simply are not going to be able to move into areas of commonality that aren't religious, that aren't political. And then when that's the case, I work with clients on boundaries, on how do we, kind of renegotiate the relationship there. But for other people, they go, yeah, like we might have a couple areas where we could work, we could find some common ground. As an example, there's a person in my life that I've determined it is worth having a relationship with, despite the many, many differences that we have. And they like the TV show Survivor. I can take it or leave it. I used to like it a lot, but now, like, whatever. I don't really want to spend 90 minutes on it a week, but I do, because they like it. And I know that it's a safe topic that we can talk about on the phone every week, who got voted off. And so I watch it because that is our common ground that we can have. And so that is our relationship. We catch up, we talk about the weather, and we talk about Survivor. And it makes them feel seen and connected and heard. And I can do that because I know that having a relationship with them is important. And so I say that because we can offer that to our clients as well. Like, are there things like that are neutral, that we can find common ground if that is important to them, if having a relationship with somebody is important? And like I said, sometimes it's not. But are there areas where we could say yes? this is a safe area for relationship. And maybe there's other areas where we would say, absolutely not. We also might invite clients to consider, if I'm going to be in relationship with certain people that have differences, maybe in certain or many areas of my life, I only give them the headline version of information about me, not the fine print. That is entirely okay. So what is the headline, the bare minimum information that I can give, and that still feels authentic, but not too much, but I don't have to give the nitty-gritty details. Again, that's a boundary piece as well, but we can practice what that is. The other piece that I like to practice with clients is a concept called titration. It's a chemistry concept. And for those of you who were in chemistry like 100 years ago, it is this idea that, okay, so, we're all in high school. And so the first thing that the teacher tells you is you get your 2 flasks of chemicals and they're like, do not pour them together.
To my distraction here, honey. And I know you don't need to. If I make
Right? Oh, sorry, there is a little distraction there. Okay. So we have this chemistry concept where there's 2 flasks of chemicals, and the teacher is going, do not pour them in together, right? And so what you're supposed to do, because they're wanting you to avoid an explosion by just like pouring them all in. And so they give you the 2 little droppers, and what they do is they have you put 1 little drop in and 1 little drop in of the other chemical, and they want you to just simply be able to observe the reaction, and then you put 1 more drop in, 1 more drop in, and you observe. That's what titration is. It's the tiniest little drop so that you can observe what happens before you add a little bit more in. And we can do that with our family members, with our friends, when we're going, hey, I'm not really sure how to navigate this relationship with them. They have these differing beliefs. They have, I'm not really sure how to go about this, but we go, what is like the smallest, most manageable thing that I can do that feels tenable? And I'm going to do that with them, or I'm going to have this conversation with them. I'm going to see how that goes. I don't want to dive in head first. So I'm going to have a teeny tiny conversation. And if that goes well, then I can have a little teeny tiny, like expand it just a little bit more. And then just a little bit more and just a little bit more. And we can slowly grow those conversations or those experiences or that time together. So instead of committing to, I'm going to have an 8-hour-long day with this person, I'm going to share everything about myself, and we're going to jump into all the politics and all the religion and everything like that, that could feel very overwhelming. That could be pouring 2 flasks of chemicals into each other. But maybe we don't need to start there. Maybe we go, hey, I can have a text message conversation with them about something rather neutral and see how that goes. And then we can, move up from there. And I think that oftentimes what scares our clients the most about having conversations with people that don't agree or believe or, whatever, is they go, I have to bare my soul. And I go, no, we can actually help them start very, very small and then work our ways up to something larger, whatever feels comfortable for them. And they never actually have to, give more than they ever want to. So that's that piece of the boundaries, because the next piece that I work on with them is then moving into how did we actually navigate politically charged conversations? Because, as we get into the summer months and everything like that, if we're being honest, we're all going to like family barbecues, probably the end of this month for Memorial Day. What do we do when everybody's talking about, the latest political issues, when Uncle Ron comes up there and, wants to talk politics or whatever. And so here we're going to go back to boundaries again. And this is, I think this can be so important. And of course, this expands outside of religious trauma and politics as well. But setting boundaries around conversations ahead of time. And I always like to tell people to, when we're talking about boundaries, they don't always have to be spoken to people. Sometimes you can just live them. Sometimes you can just put them into practice yourself without having to have conversations. And maybe nobody will even know, and that's okay. Other times, you might want to have some conversations with people, especially if these people have proven to be a little bit safer and maybe can handle those conversations. But in some cases, you just go ahead and live it. But for navigating politically charged conversations, identifying some boundaries ahead of time around what are things that I will and will not talk about, right? What are things that I feel comfortable and safe talking about? And do I need to communicate that ahead of time? Maybe there I have a safe person, a cousin, a parent, a sibling that I could say, hey, I'm totally fine to talk about these things, but not these things. And so if these things come up, I'm going to stop talking, or I'm going to politely excuse myself. Maybe you just walk away and you go to the bathroom, and then you walk back, and if they're still talking, you have to go to the bathroom again. Maybe you have IBS that day, who knows? And we go to the bathroom 15 times. I'm just kidding. But it actually doesn't matter. You don't have to explain yourself. No, I digress. But what do you want to do when those things happen? And do we need to communicate that ahead of time? If not, you can just excuse yourself from that conversation. And with that, what do I need to do, or what do I want to do if, but probably when, the conversation goes sideways? So if we're having some sort of conversation and it takes a turn in a direction that I don't particularly feel comfortable with, what do I want to do? Do I feel comfortable saying something like, hey, I don't feel comfortable going there? Or is that my cue that I could get up and leave? So really thinking through, how would I want to handle these situations? This one may require conversations ahead of time, but could you come up with a safe word? Is there a timer that you could have around politically charged conversations so that we automatically take a break? We can have a conversation about political issues, but after 20 minutes, the timer goes off and we are done. Like, we are not going to go there again. Could we universally agree that there is certain topics that are just off the table? We will not talk about these certain things. Or maybe if the conversation gets to a certain point or decibel level, or if it becomes debating versus conversating, that we could stop. So that would involve conversations where you're planning ahead of time. And for some people, that might feel really good. You could have conversations with family members or friends ahead of time that says, we're going to actually put in some guardrails that this could happen. And so that is entirely possible. This next thing that I like to work on with clients is not always possible. It's actually a technique that I took from working with couples when they are talking through conflict. So it may not work for everybody, but it might also work and could be cool. It's a cool repair moment. But could we also agree that at the ending point of a conversation, that we could do something together to kind of orient us back to the present moment and one another, that reminds us that we like each other, that we're more than what this topic is, that we have a relationship outside of this specific belief or political issue. Maybe that means we play a game, we turn a song on and dance it out, we do something neutral or maybe even positive that kind of gets us back to remembering that we actually have a relationship with one another, that's more than this conversation or issue. A lot of that does take planning. And again, sometimes that means planning with other people to navigate a politically charged conversation. Not all clients are going to be open to that. And truly, not all families or friends would be able to do that sort of thing, but it is possible for some people, and each client is going to have to determine what is right for them. And with that, what is their self-care plan? What is it that you need to feel a little bit safer in those moments? Do you need to phone a friend? Do you need to have, your own safe word or emoji so that somebody can quick send you a joke? Do you need an exit plan? You need to just give yourself permission to not have those conversations, because that is actually an option. And I think that's one that we forget about a lot, and clients forget about that a lot. Just because somebody wants to have a conversation with you does not mean that you're obligated to have it. And I think especially when we're coming out of high control religions, there's a sense of obligation that many of us have, that because you're asked, you have to answer or you have to engage. And so I think that skill of going, I actually have agency to say, no, I'm not interested. Again, that goes back to embodied boundaries. That can be really helpful. And to practice that with clients can be really, really empowering. So let's move on to the next one. I also work through with clients the concept of grieving, which might sound kind of weird, but I think it's really important to the election cycle, and specifically for, grief if your candidate doesn't win, but it even goes beyond that. Because regardless if your candidate wins or not, election cycles are incredibly tumultuous. And there can be a lot of grief because of it just being such a tumultuous race. There can be grief over people's true colors coming out because there's things that are said that can't be unsaid. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of grief for people saying the quiet parts out loud. And so, people, where you're like, gosh, I didn't know that you thought this thing, or I didn't know that I didn't feel safe with you, or things like that. And so grief is often a very large part of an election cycle. And so helping clients grieve through what their experience is oftentimes very, very common. When we talk about grief, obviously Elizabeth Kubler-Ross comes to mind, and her model of grief, which I'm going to loosely reference. But I think before I do that, one of the things we need to focus on is that when she came up with her model of grief, she did so for people that were dying, who had chronic illnesses and were learning how to live while simultaneously dying. And I think that there's something there also that we can kind of apply to an election cycle, because we are learning to, just like chronically ill patients are learning to navigate the overwhelm and the emotional process of how to learn to live while they are also dying. We are learning to navigate overwhelm and the emotional process of not knowing what's going to happen while still going through this, and knowing that things are going to change. It's not going to be the same, because even if your candidate does win, or even if the policy is passed or the bill is passed, it's just not the same, and things are going to change, and they're not going to be the same. There's things that are not going to be able to be undone, and relationships change, and everything like that. And so I think that to me feels very applicable. But the three parts that I kind of want to focus on within her model of grief is denial, anger, and acceptance. So the definition of denial that I like to use is that denial is a defense mechanism that we as humans use to keep us from seeing things as they truly are, because if we did see them for how they truly are, they would feel consciously intolerable. And as humans, we use denial in a myriad of ways. We use it to avoid things. We can see this in the election cycle as well. We want to avoid things, sometimes just willfully ignore them, be willfully ignorant. Sometimes in the election cycle, we use denial to maybe not acknowledge privilege, or which could also include privilege to vote. We use denial as a coping skill, maybe due to stress or exhaustion or survival, just like not having any bandwidth for anything else. And we use denial because sometimes we just have no capacity to deal with anything. Like, therapists who find it really, really difficult to, want to deal with anything, any difficult topics in our own lives after sitting with clients all day, dealing with difficult topics in their own lives. And so, yeah, we can use denial there as well. It's a normal coping mechanism that we use, but I think working with clients to understand where is there possibly denial coming up in your own life around the election cycle. Because oftentimes when we face that denial, that's where anger comes up. Anger is simply, it's a natural emotion that we feel when we start seeing things for how they truly are. And when we bring it back to the religious trauma piece, oftentimes denial is just a state that we are forced to live in. We can only see things with these like little tiny blinders on because this is how we're told that we have to live. The world is just this big. And so when we start to open up those blinders, when we get to see things for how they truly are, it can feel wildly angering because we start to see that we were sold a bill of goods that maybe wasn't entirely accurate. And so the anger feels like the natural thing that we should feel. The natural thing that we feel when we see what we have been denied. Of course, we would get angry. I think that is a very, very appropriate response. And I think that's true when we look at politics as well, and especially when they're married together. So we start to see like, oh my goodness, what is happening here? And so there is a lot of anger when we see, gosh, this person that I thought was a really safe person turns out not to be, or this candidate that I believed in didn't get voted in, or this policy that was like life-saving turned out not to be something that we, got voted a yes for. And I think as clinicians then, like we can help our clients remember or realize that anger unto itself is not bad or good. It is very neutral. It's just a piece of information that just helps us understand what is going on inside of us. And, what we do with that anger definitely could be healthy or unhealthy, toxic, non-toxic, harmful, helpful, whatever. And we can help our clients learn ways to safely process anger. Anger is a very active emotion. And so we can help our clients find ways to be active and navigate that emotion. And finally, we can help them with acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean that everything's okay. It doesn't mean that everything's perfect, that we're glad something happened. And that it just means that it is what it is. Come November, like acceptance means like, yeah, like the elections happened. Somebody won. We may not like it. We may be actually miserable. We may be in shambles. We have no idea. We don't have to put a silver lining around it. Well, at least this, well, at least that, right? We can still be really upset and angry and still live in a space of acceptance and say, this is what happened, right? Acceptance just allows for us to feel how we feel and in this moment, and then move on to the next moment and feel how we feel in that moment as well. And it gives us the permission to keep our feet planted in reality and still have hope, right? I do hope that things get better, or I hope that things can change, or I wish for something different, right? And I think that is part of the beautiful piece of acceptance. I think that's probably what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross meant by acceptance as well. Like we can always hope that things get better and still live in the reality of what is. And I think that's part of what this grief process can be in the election cycle piece as well. So I have two more things that I work on with clients, and then we'll kind of start to wrap this up. And I don't really know why I put this towards the end, because in reality, this is the very first thing that I start working on with clients. And I think the most important thing, but and honestly, I'm a very eclectic person, so I don't believe that there's one right way to do anything, but this is the thing that I hang my hat on, and I'm like, This is my new gospel. And so it is developing internal safety and stability and resources, even when the world seems chaotic. Religion does a great job at divorcing us from ourselves. And I've said this a few times, like, the high control religion teaches the body is bad and evil and stay away from it, right? And it denies us of our inherent goodness and wisdom and resources. And so when I work with clients, one of the first things that we do is we start to come back home to ourselves, and we start to develop a sense of internal safety and stability, so that despite anything that's going on outside of us, we always have something inside of us that can help us feel safe and stable and secure. And so that is, like I said, this is the thing that I talk to all, or that I work on with all of my clients. We're talking about nervous system work here. And we just, for most people who are coming out of high control religions, if there is trauma, we're talking about more like complex trauma. And so there just hasn't been a sense of stability and safety that they've been able to have in their lives. That's just not been a part of their experience. And so they don't have a sense of safety to return to. That's not part of their lived experience, their historical lived experience. So we have to build that from scratch. And so when we're talking about, religious trauma in the elections, we're probably building that from scratch as well, because I'm working with a lot of new people, that I haven't been in coaching or therapy with before this point. And so we're building skills to find internalized safety and support and stability. And so, yeah, this is the thing. And we build everything off of this point. So we're wanting to give clients skills that are independent of the chaos on the outside world, and what's going on around them and what's happening, so that they can tune into themselves. And because they always have themselves with them, right? So like I said, I'm referring here to nervous system regulation. I put all of these resources on the list, but we're looking at work from like Deb Dana, Stephen Porges, Rebecca Ladine, Irene Lyon. That there's some great resources that they gave. These are like grounding activities, orienting skills, really, really great stuff, and helping clients really return to themselves. This is the base. These are skills that are the very basic skills, so that we can go and then resolve trauma as well. And this is what allows our clients then to actually do all this integration work. So then, as they're walking along in the world and triggers happen, not if, but when triggers happen, they have coping skills within them to be able to regulate and find better ways, safer ways to keep going through the world, which leads to my last and final point of how I work with clients for religious trauma in the election cycle, is actually helping them learn to navigate religious trauma triggers. And this is going to vary a little bit from client to client, because we want to help them become aware of their own triggers. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. So if you're here with us in the South, and you go into any store, they're probably playing Christian music, which was very new for me when I moved here, because I was like, oh, wow, did not expect that to, my shoulders to go up in every store that I was in, right? I had to learn that, and to know that there was times where I had to walk right back out because it was too much for me. I don't have to do that anymore. I've learned how to work through it. Earbuds, that's the key there. But, we're going to have people that are they just have a variety of different triggers, helping our clients learn what are the things that are triggering for you. Maybe that is, different people, places, things. It could be a variety of things. And then we work with them to go, what would help you feel just a little bit safer? I love the language that Pete Walker uses in his book, Complex PTSD, where he talks about a little bit safer or safe enough, right? So we might not be able to get somebody feeling completely safe all the time. In fact, I don't think that that's actually the goal of nervous system work. It is to get ourselves to be able to have a flexible nervous system where we can find a sense of safety and kind of live with flexibility. And so what does that person need to feel safe enough or just a little bit safer when they're feeling triggered? And then we also help them develop new coping mechanisms. And that, again, is going to be different from person to person. What is it that they uniquely find works for them, as well as finding finding connections that they can lean into? Are there other people? Are there pets? Are there plants, the earth that they can ground into, that they can feel connected to, that would help them feel safe and connected, to help them feel rooted in the midst of triggers? So those are kind of the high level topics that I go over with clients. I also go over them in the course that I created called Religious Trauma in the Election Cycle. But before I kind of get to that, I wanted to hit one other thing, because there's a little bit of a debate over this, because we're talking about politics, which is a very debatable topic. And it's this idea of remaining neutral when politics makes its way into our office. I don't know how many people here are in social media spaces and are in therapy social media spaces, but if you are, there is a big debate on, should you be like talking to your clients about, like, should you be bringing up with your clients your own political stances? Should you be correcting clients on what they should be believing? Should you be swaying your clients' beliefs? Should you be, like, I don't know, challenging them on their political beliefs? And so I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I do believe it's our job to be relational with our clients and to develop that relationship with them. But I also believe it's our job to let clients decide for themselves, especially when our clients are coming out of high control religions and fundamentalism and cults and other groups where they are used to being told what to do, what to think. They are very easily swayed. They are very easily intimidated and told what to do. And there's a power dynamic between a therapist or a coach and their client. And if they hear you saying, "You really sure you believe that? You should go read that article. You should go, I really don't think that is what you think it is." That now takes the client's internal locus of control and shifts it back to an external locus of control. And they're outsourcing their sense of knowledge onto you and putting you in a position of power instead of learning to tune into their own sense of wisdom and goodness. And so I just want to invite people that even if your clients are believing the most heinous things according to your own belief system, to give your client space to navigate that in their own way is so incredibly important. And it might literally require you to bite your tongue. But that can be a really important moment for your client to learn how to process things in their own way and to come to their own conclusions and to learn how to navigate differences in a way that doesn't have to feel dangerous. And helping our clients learn to turn inwards is such a beautiful thing and gift that we can give our clients. And for so many of them coming out of high control spaces, they've never had that before. And I think it's just such a unique and beautiful opportunity that we can give them. So the last thing I want to end with is, remember that you too are a human and you're impacted by the election cycle. So please make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Yes, remain neutral, but also remember that, like, take breaks and you can seek your own support and get resources and take care of yourself and ground yourself and notice where you're being triggered, regulate yourself and find the support where you need it. I know I've mentioned that I have my a course that I put together. Those resources are all in the resource sheet. You can use the code elections to get $15 off. my book, my website, social media, everything. It's on the sheet. I think we're going to do a question and answer time. So hit me with it.
Yes, thank you so much. That was amazing. And I know that we are officially at time, so if anyone has to jump off, don't feel bad. But if you'd like to stay on for a bit for some Q&A, we can do that. And I did put the link to the doc that will also go out in the email. So in addition to all the resources Laura shared, there is a link to the Reclamation Collective, which is an organization she recommended that if you'd like to make a donation to support the efforts of healing from religious trauma, that's an excellent place to do it. So feel free to raise your hand, since we have so many folks. Raising the digital hand would be helpful, or you can just put a question in the chat too. And if anybody doesn't know where the raise hand went, it's under reactions. Oh, I thought, there we go. Linda.
So, thank you so much, Laura. Fabulous. I enjoyed every bit of it. I wonder if you could speak a little. I so agree with you that the relational aspect is so important, and that helping people turn inward to their own truth is so important. And I'm thinking about a session I had with someone many years ago when this person was making very strong Islamophobic statements. And I didn't say anything, but she could just read my face that I was not on board. And um, I would just love to hear, how do you deal with repair when those kinds of ruptures
Yeah.
happen?
I've had that happen to me too. I think this is the way I handled it. I apologize because I said, I think I took like my own personal preferences or biases out. Like you could see that. And I'm sure that that was jarring for you to see. And I just wanted to apologize. And that was helpful for her to hear. And I like obviously did not agree with what the person was saying, but the session was hers. And so it felt important to say that. It wasn't about me trying to convince her that she was wrong. And so I felt like that was the most important thing to do. And I knew that it meant a lot for her to hear that from me, more important than trying to be right. And so I felt like that actually helped the relationship more, more than just be like, oh, well, let me teach my client, like I think nowadays I'm more interested in being like in that relationship than being right. Like that feels better to me. So I think that's probably the route that I would go. And then I would say, is there anything that you want to ask me, or is there anything else that you need from me? That could help you feel safer in this moment. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Like, I call in myself.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry.
just maybe one more little point kind of about the neutrality piece. Um, like when I have clients, which is most of my clients, who uh, I guess align strongly in the same direction that I do. It's if they're bringing it up and they're making a comment, I think sometimes it can feel it makes this space feel even safer for them when they know
Mhm.
that I share that,
Yeah.
right? So in those cases, um, I'm not going to be shy about making that known. So I don't know if you're letting the client lead, do you sort of like break from that neutrality a bit?
I would say probably like use it as a case by case basis,
Yeah.
because I would say in some cases, yeah, you totally could. The only thing I see hindering that is like, if you make that a habit, then the times that you may not be as enthusiastically agreeing with them, they would be like, oh, you don't agree with me, right? And so there, you could have a little bit of a rupture there. That wouldn't be, and maybe some clients would like breeze right past that and it would not be an issue at all. But some clients, it would be like, be extremely helpful for them to know, yes, you agree with me on this issue. Other clients, they really don't care. They just want to be able to say, here's how I think or believe or whatever. And simply saying, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, without having to, say, yeah, me too, I agree with that, or, whatever. Yeah. So I would say probably a client by client basis, but just noting that there is that potential down the road where if you didn't agree with them on something else, it could kind of flag something for them at a different point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Anderson, for your time and expertise. And I hope that folks check out some of those resources and the Reclamation Collective. And I also put a very funny video at the end that if you have not seen it, you must. So you will get all of that too in your email tomorrow.
Yay.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
NPI, for hosting.
Lovely to see everybody.